Welcome to the Dan Sports Tips Daily Fantasy Preview Show for NFL Wildcard Weekend on DraftKings. I will be taking a look at everything you need for your daily fantasy games this week. I will be looking at offensive stacks, defensive stacks, and players that can be used in other positions. Obviously, with only the 4 games to play with this week, we are going to be looking for the high-scoring games this week. Any of you looking to use offensive stacks in Houston v Oakland, you can stop watching the show now. You clearly don't like money. I have a little sort of feeling that Green Bay and the New York Giants might be lower scoring than expected as well. I'm going to have my main focus on the Pittsburgh-Miami game and the Seattle and Detroit game. My first offensive stack this week is Russell Wilson, the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, and tight end Jimmy Graham, 5,300. Ultimately, the worst pass defense in the game, as ranked by DVOA, is the Detroit Lions, who now head out on the road to Seattle, where the Seahawks are very tough to beat. The Lions do boast an excellent cover corner in Darius Slay, who, while probably not performing to levels expected a little this year, could well raise the bar of his game in this one. The interesting question is whether or not he will be used to shadow Doug Baldwin or not. The number 1 receiver for Seattle, Baldwin, Slay rarely lines up in the slot. He spends most of his time on the outside, and Baldwin has spent over 3/4 of his routes lining up in the slot this year. This is also combined in the middle of the field, which is the weakness of the Detroit pass defense. Personally, I'm still willing to hope that Slade does shadow Baldwin a bit, take the punt on Graham, and you know, the Lions have been terrible against tight ends this year. They've allowed over 10 touchdowns to the position. If you want to go super under the radar, an alternative stack to this one is quarterback Russell Wilson for $7,000, tight end Luke Wilson for $2,500. Wilson is firmly the number 2 tight end on the depth chart for Seattle. But he does have a touchdown in each of the last 2 games he's played. He is potentially a high upside flyer that will enable you to pay up at other positions when constructing your roster. Graham is obviously the safer play because he will definitely see the volume and get the yardage. You are going to need a touchdown or 2 for Wilson to pay off, but it is certainly worth considering for a flyer in sort of a big field tournament. The Detroit Lions, quarterback Matthew Stafford for $5,700, wide receiver Anquan Bolden for $4,000. We have to assume a game where neither team runs the ball particularly well, but Detroit don't defend the pass well either, that they are going to have to air the ball out here if they want to stay competitive. Since Earl Thomas has got hurt, the Seahawks have been susceptible over the middle of the field. I'm happy to take a chance with Anquan Bolden here. He's a primary slot receiver for the Detroit Lions. He will see a lot of Jeremy Lane in coverage, who is easily the weakest corner on the Seahawks unit. Marvin Jones and Golden Tate, the other receivers, do tend to split their time on either side, so they should see fairly even amounts of Richard Sherman, who I want absolutely no part of in this game. Bolden is a fairly solid red zone threat. I think he's the play on the Detroit Lions receivers this week. And the New York Giants, quarterback Eli Manning for $6,100, wide receiver Odell Beckham for $9,100. Without doubt, this is probably the most premium stack of the week for me, but if the Giants are going to win in this game, it's going to depend on the performance of Manning and whether he looks after the ball. There is no clear way of knowing whether or not that will happen, that I can see or project anyway. I have concerns that this game may be lower in points than expected by a lot of people, as I say, and that sort of is a little bit of a drawback for this stat because you're going to need points in the game. That being said, the Giants do have a rock solid defense against both run and pass. And the Packers secondary that has struggled all year has also got some injury woes now, and as such there could be some mileage in using Eli and hoping for the best. Odell, love him or hate him, can break any catch for a big gain at any time. I think the New York Giants are going to go into Lambeau Field and win this game. It certainly hasn't been a fortress this year with the likes of the Colts and the Titans going in there and winning. I'm keen to avoid all of the Packers myself this week. As I say, the New York Giants defence and the fact I think the game could be low scoring, I'm going to avoid on Green Bay and hope that other people are filling their lineups with them. Other quarterbacks we can use. I'm not actually going to put anyone up officially. I couldn't put you off Matt Moore, maybe Ben Roethlisberger as well. As I say, I think that game could be up there amongst the top 2 highest scoring games. Running backs, there's a lot of options. You've got obviously Le'Veon Bell of Pittsburgh for $10,300. This is ABC. You're not going to need me to tell you. If you can fit Le'Veon Bell in at the position this week, then you should. He's a driving force of the Pittsburgh offense. He receives volume that we can count on. DVOA ranks Miami as just number 22 defending the run this year, and Le'Veon is clearly the top play but you're going to have to pay the premium price for him at the position this week. Jay Ajayi of the Miami Dolphins for 6,800. The Dolphins will get as far as running back Ajayi can carry them this year. Pittsburgh's defense is fairly solid, but it also lacks in consistency. They are capable of a bad showing, just as when the Steelers were destroyed by the Eagles earlier this year, or against Miami in one of Ajayi's 200-yard rushing games that he has put on the board this year. Now, while it would be foolish to expect that kind of production, and there could be a game flow issue if Pittsburgh do jump out in front as well, as there was for the Dolphins last week against the Patriots, adding the injury concerns, there is risk with Jay Ajayi, but we have got only 4 games to look at, and I think Ajayi is one of the better plays at running back this week, and Paul Perkins of the New York Giants for 4,100. This is the cheap running back option if you're looking for one and need one. The Green Bay Packers run defense that was outstanding early in the year, ranking in the top 3 in the league in DVOA, is now middle of the pack, ranking just 14. They are leaking yards to running backs. Perkins comes in having taken the starting gig away from Rashad Jennings and coming off a 100-yard game against what is an admittedly poor Redskins unit last week. However, he still averaged 4.5 yards per carry the previous week against an Eagles unit that ranks in a similar area against the run in DVOA as the Green Bay Packers. I think Perkins does have the most upside of the cheap running back plays this week. At wide receiver, we'll look at Antonio Brown of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 9,400. You can't fit them all in your lineup, but Antonio Brown is the best wide receiver in football. Pittsburgh are hosting the Dolphins. They're a much better offense at Heinz Field. I don't trust Roethlisberger enough to stack, but ultimately the Dolphins ranked 22nd in DVOA against the pass this year. That's a matchup where Brown should far exceed his numbers when the teams met earlier this year. He only managed 39 yards. That won't happen this time. Jarvis Landry of Miami for 5,100. Landry catches a lot of ball. He gets a lot of work in this offense. He's relatively unaffected by game flow. They use him both in front and behind. A repeat of his 7 for 91 in the Dolphins' win against Pittsburgh earlier this year would be a positive addition to your lineup. A touchdown will make him an outstanding tournament player if he can have one of those. Personally, I feel Landry is the number 1 receiver on the Miami Dolphins unit, and Pittsburgh ranked 32nd in DVOA against the opposing team's number 1 wide receiver. Certainly it's Landry or Devontae Parker. My personal preference is for Landry just because he's been that more consistent. Wide receiver Eli Rogers of Pittsburgh for 4,000. I actually, in all likelihood, am probably going to use Rogers in more lineups than Brown this week, as the Dolphins have struggled against slot receivers. They're ranked 31st in DVOA against that lineup. Rodgers has spent over 80% of his snaps this year lined up in the slot and has bounced back with a solid end to the season with at least 61 yards and double-digit DraftKings points in each of his last 3 games to close the season. Tight end Eric Ebron of Detroit for 3,900. The middle of the field is the weakness, as we've said, for the Hawks without Earl Thomas. That could see opportunity for Ebron. He is a player that's hard to trust. He hasn't caught a touchdown pass since week 1 of the season and has been inconsistent. Though he does come into this game off of 2 solid performances. Seattle ranked 19th in DVOA against tight ends, and he likely needs to have a big performance for the Lions to have any success this week. My defensive stack this week is running back Lamar Miller for 6,100 and the Houston Texans defense for 3,800. Miller has missed the last 2 weeks of the season, but he has practiced fully this week. He's not on the injury report for a game against the Raiders team that he compiled one of his 4 100-yard rushing games earlier this season and found the end zone for over 20 DraftKings points. The Raiders rank 18th against the run. It would be wise of the Texans to keep the ball out of Brock Osweiler's hands as much as they can in this game. Oakland are also banged up on their offensive line. Kelechi Osemele left last week's game with an injury. Left tackle Donald Penn is struggling to play in this game. Even in the absence of JJ Watt, the pass rush in Houston has been alright this year. Jadeveon Clowney has finally lived up somewhat to the hype with an injury-free year, and I think Houston's defense, facing a rookie quarterback in his first NFL start on the road in the playoffs, are in a good spot to get at the quarterback a few times and maybe get a few turnovers as well. That's the stack I'm involved with on that game, and it's probably going to be my only involvement in Houston and Oakland. And if you want to look for another defense, I think the New York Giants defense for 3,100. There's likely to be high ownership of Packers this week. An excellent way to fade them is with the Giants defense, who, while they aren't expected to have a high sack total, do have ball hawks in the secondary, and they cover the pass well and stop the run. They rank 4th in the top 4, in DVOA against both run and pass. Now, I acknowledge the Packers offense ranks in the top 7 both running and passing the football. The old adage advantage of taking defence against offence comes into play here. The Packers have lost some shockers at Lambeau this year before beating up on a soft schedule down the stretch. I think the Giants are legit here. If Eli doesn't give up lots of turnovers and short fields and extra possessions to Aaron Rodgers, then I think the Giants defence will have a solid day at a reasonable price. That is what I have got for you this week. Best of luck with your lineups. If you haven't signed up to play DraftKings yet, I will pop a link in the description beneath this video that will enable you to do that today and join in the fun of the playoffs. Don't forget to tweet me at dansports.tips if you have any success with the advice I've given you in this show. I will be back next week for the divisional round. See you later.